YouTube! Today we're going to be reacting to what is the strongest tornado in history. This is by High Risk Chris. I'll have a link to this video and his channel in the description below. That way if you want to watch it without looking at my face, more than welcome to do so. Once again, in the description below. Let's check it out.
May 3rd, 1999. At 6:23 in the afternoon, one of the most infamous tornadoes of all time touched the ground. This tornado tore a 38-mile path through the communities of Bridge Creek and Moore, Oklahoma. Areas subject to the extreme winds of the tornado were transformed beyond recognition. The top layer of soil and grass was stripped from the ground. Entire buildings were not only
Bridge Creek and Moore. Strongest winds on earth, boys. Very strong winds. Look at that. There's a hot water heater. I absolutely hate hot water heaters. I had to change mine about a week ago. Actually, it's not too bad. It's just a pain in the butt.
destroyed. They were shredded to pieces and swept away, leaving only concrete foundations. And on top of that, mobile Doppler radar scanning the tornado found something extraordinary. This tornado contained winds as high as 321 miles per hour, the fastest winds ever measured on Earth. While this tornado has an extremely compelling case as the strongest tornado in history, this topic deserves a bit more nuanced research. For one, most tornadoes have not been measured by Doppler radar, so this tornado is in a relatively small group of tornadoes. On top of that, the damage produced by this tornado, while extreme, is not the worst tornado damage ever documented. That feat was done by another, perhaps even more infamous tornado, the 1997 Jarrell, Texas tornado. On May 27, 1997, at 3:40 in the afternoon, a rather unassuming tornado formed along Interstate 35 in central Texas. This skinny tornado traveled southwest, consistently gaining strength as it progressed towards the small town of Jarrell, Texas. The
very slow
tornado was now a massive beast, and instead of moving to the southwest, the tornado stalled over the small community of Double Creek Estates. Soon after, the tornado dissipated to the west. The damage left by the tornado over the Double Creek Estates can only be described as apocalyptic. Absolutely nothing was left. There was no debris from the homes. Furthermore, the top layer of soil had been scraped off the ground, leaving a muddy, dreadful landscape. The only people who had survived this tornado had taken cover in an underground tornado shelter. All others who were not below ground had sadly passed. The damage that occurred at the Double Creek Estates is widely considered the worst tornado damage ever documented.
I'd actually kind of forgotten about that because, like, I reacted to Jarrell, Texas, like, super early on. And I knew, like, whenever it got over that town, they pretty much stalled and was moving incredibly slow anyways. So, like, literally everyone above ground passed away. That's insane. Insanely scary and sad. Jesus, dude. Yeah, this is why I like going back and watching some of these is along the way you forget some information, right? And I know a lot of people are going to already be arguing, because I've seen it 100 times in my comments already. Of like, well, the only reason it did that damage was because it just stalled over town. What if it was moving fast? It wasn't. It stalled over town and did that damage. We're not playing make-believe here. That happened. That's one of the things that usually bothers me is like people try to play like make-believe in the comments and, you know, well, the only reason it did that, like, you know, in that situation, the only reason it did that damage is because it stalled. Maybe, but it happened. So, that damage was done. That's why I had it so far up on my list. Is, yeah, you know, there's tornadoes at like Smithville and stuff like that were moving faster and caused some crazy damage. I'm not trying to downplay those tornadoes, but Jarrell, Texas happened. It moved slow. It stalled over a town. You know, whenever we did our top 10 and we imagined a tornado going over this imaginary town, that was one of the things that I considered. Like, this was a slow-moving tornado. It was going to stall over parts and cause that kind of damage. That's why it was so far high up in my rankings. Anyways, I'll end the rant and get back to the video.
Making it an even better candidate as the strongest tornado in history, right? It's once again not that straightforward. The tornado was nearly stationary over the area it created its worst damage. The extremely long exposure explains the missing debris. Also, Central Texas had experienced above average rainfall in the weeks prior, so the ground was likely extremely muddy even before the tornado hit. These factors put doubts to this tornado's claim as the strongest tornado in history.
Well, once again, I'm going to bark at this guy too. High risk Chris. One of the doubts of it is because it was slow moving. It doesn't matter. It was moving slow. It happened. That's all you got to say. It happened.
So, if Jarrell or Bridge Creek are not the strongest, which other tornadoes are potentially even stronger? While digging deep into this topic, I found something interesting. Ted Fujita, the creator of the tornado rating scale, had considered rating 3 tornadoes F6 because the damage from these tornadoes was even more extreme than the damage described by the F5 rating. These 3 tornadoes are the 1970 Lubbock, Texas tornado, 1974 Xenia, Ohio tornado, and 1977 Birmingham.
Okay, I'd heard of the other two, the Lubbock, Texas. Someone had mentioned that in the comments of my last video. Work brain yesterday. I got it on a list to potentially watch here very soon. Just got to get around to it.
Tornado. An F6 rating meant that these tornadoes potentially had winds above 320 miles per hour, which seems unimaginable, but this was the same number measured in the Bridge Creek tornado, 321 miles per hour. The damage from the 1970 Lubbock tornado was definitely violent, but doesn't seem worthy of the F6 rating, so I'm gonna throw this one out. The other 2 tornadoes, Xenia and Birmingham, are much more interesting. The 1977 Birmingham tornado ravaged the northern suburbs of Birmingham, Alabama, a part of the country that is extremely prone to violent tornadoes. The tornado peaked in strength on this block here, where a dozen different houses were not only destroyed, they were fully swept clean off of their foundations. Trees in the area were also mowed down by the extreme winds of the tornado. This sort of damage can only be caused by the absolute strongest winds possible, and to a certain extent, I can understand why Ted Fujita considered rating this tornado F6. Now, the last F6 tornado, the 1974 Xenia tornado, a much more well-known tornado.
We've heard a lot about this one, just in the comments. I don't think I've ever got to watch a video about this one, but it's been talked about so much in the comments that I'm kind of I'm a tiny bit familiar with it.
Tornado because it occurred during the 1974 Super Outbreak, impacting a large town in Ohio. Unlike the other 2 F6 tornadoes, the Xenia tornado was recorded on video, which is one of the most famous and analyzed tornado videos ever captured. The Xenia tornado completely leveled and swept homes clean off of their foundations in the Arrowhead subdivision. Ted Fujita described the damage in this area as the worst damage he had ever surveyed, and looking at these photos, I can understand why he said that. However, this occurred 50 years ago, and we have a bit more insight into.
Wait, is that the... Dang. That's tough. Holy. Now, this was back in, 74? Is that right? Back in the 70s. So, I'm guessing here. I don't know for sure. But I would imagine that homes weren't built as solid as they are today. I could be wrong there. I'm just guessing. Spitballing.
However, this occurred 50 years ago, and we have a bit more insight into rating tornadoes now than we did back then. It is believed that the homes slapped in the Arrowhead subdivision were of poor construction quality. Additionally, the rest of the damage inflicted by the tornado is nowhere near as extreme as what occurred here. These issues cast doubt on Fujita's assessment of this tornado's preliminary F6 rating, and if we're being honest, the concept of an F6 tornado has been completely shut down by modern tornado classifications. These ratings were only considered because the Fujita scale was in its infancy in the 70s. Even though Fujita described Xenia as the worst tornado damage he had ever surveyed, I think there were 2 other tornadoes that were potentially even stronger that happened the same day, the Brandenburg, Kentucky and Guin, Alabama F5s. In Brandenburg, Kentucky, numerous well-built and anchor-bolted homes were swept away, including one home that had part of its basement wall collapse. Windrowing of debris and ground scouring was reported.
That's stout, dude.
And vehicles were completely obliterated down to their frames. And in Guin, Alabama, multiple areas of F5 damage occurred, with homes completely swept away, and supposedly some of which had their foundations dislodged. Trees were debarked, and ground scouring was observed. The tornado also left behind a path of destruction through a national forest that was easily seen from space. Given the magnitude of the 1974 Super Outbreak, these tornadoes were some of the strongest tornadoes in history. But if there's one day that produced even stronger tornadoes, it's the 2011 Super Outbreak. On April 27, 2011, a record number of tornadoes formed across the southeast, 4 of which
2011 produced some of the wildest tornadoes of all time, dude. I mean, look at that. Smithville, Phil Campbell, Rainsville, the Philadelphia. My Lord. Like, we've covered all of those, and it's just, it blows my mind. All inside that 1 year.
achieved the highest possible rating, EF5. The first EF5 from this day formed in Philadelphia, Mississippi. This tornado is most known for the extreme ground scouring it caused, leaving a 2-foot deep trench in certain areas and ripping up a road's pavement. The next EF5 that formed was the long track violent tornado that tore through the towns of Phil Campbell and Hackleburg, Alabama, leaving a path of destruction more than 100 miles long, making it the longest track and arguably most dominant tornado on this day. This tornado swept away dozens of homes, a few of which had their foundations damaged. It also peeled the asphalt off of a road and infamously tore the roof off an underground storm shelter. What's incredible about this tornado is that it sustained its EF5 intensity for a majority of the time it was on the ground. But the Phil Campbell tornado had an evil cousin that was potentially even stronger, the Smithville EF5. The Smithville tornado quickly formed southwest of town, and as it entered town, it left a deep trench in the ground. The fairly compact tornado continued through town at a blistering speed of 60 miles per hour, completely wiping out every structure it came into contact with, leaving only bare foundations. The last building struck.
That's one of the big arguments I hear of why people think Smithville is one of the strongest, is it was able to do that damage while traveling that fast. Which this tornado obviously, it's going to be in almost anyone's top 10. It was a beast. Absolute beast of a tornado. And it's still scary to me that tornadoes can travel that fast. When you start telling me that tornadoes are traveling 55 to 70 miles per hour, and some even faster, nah. There ain't no way.
Struck in town was a funeral home made of bricks, and it was pulverized to the point where the bricks were turned into dust. But it wasn't just the damage to homes that was incredible. A truck had been tossed so violently through the air that it left a large dent in the town's water tower. Additionally, underground plumbing was pulled out of the ground.
On that note, after it hit the water tower, the tornado continued to carry that truck or car to the funeral home as well. It was found right at the edge of the woods, if I remember correctly. Insane.
SDF-5 on this historic day formed a few hours later in northeast Alabama, tracking through the towns of Fife and Rainsville. Like many other tornadoes on this day, this tornado was extremely violent, partially disturbing the ground and completely wiping out countless homes. But perhaps the most impressive feat of strength was when the tornado partially dislodged an underground storm shelter. The tornadoes that occurred on April 27, 2011 are without a doubt some of the strongest tornadoes ever documented, because not only were they moving at extremely high speeds, they were also producing some of the most intense tornado damage ever documented. Less than a month later, another powerful tornado formed in southwest Missouri. Tragically, this large and violent tornado tracked directly through the town of
Joplin, Missouri,
turning a large percentage of the once peaceful town into complete chaos. The Joplin tornado displayed its extreme strength by destroying every single home it touched, wiping multi-story apartment buildings and turning large warehouses like the Home Depot into shreds of metal. The Joplin EF5 was the deadliest tornado in American history since the early 1900s, killing 158.
R.I.P.
2011 was an extreme year.
I always say this too, with Joplin, because I feel like it's not talked about very often is the fungus that the tornado left behind as well. It just slung around town. A lot of people got sick from that. Once again, I believe there's some short movie or a little series about Joplin where it actually talks about the fungus and some of the people that struggled with it. I just like throwing that out there.
For tornadoes, because 2 days later, another EF5 tornado touched the earth. The tornado formed near the town of El Reno, Oklahoma, and traveled northeast at around 35 miles per hour. The tornado peaked in strength just after crossing I-40 when it struck the Cactus 117 oil rig, and in an extreme feat of strength, the 2-million-pound rig was toppled. This tornado was also one of the few tornadoes to be scanned by mobile Doppler radar. And Doppler radar showed this tornado contained winds up to 295 miles per hour. As the tornado tore across the rural parts of Oklahoma, it left a wake of destruction, wiping homes clean off their foundations, tilling up the top layer of soil, and debarking trees. Also, the scar from this tornado can be clearly seen from space.
We got so lucky that both of the El Reno tornadoes spent a large amount of their time in open field. And not going through like a huge subdivision or whatever like Joplin or anything like that. Thankfully.
The El Reno EF5 is unquestionably one of the strongest tornadoes in history. The next EF5 occurred 2 years later and only 25 miles away in Moore, Oklahoma, the part of the country that seems doomed to the strongest tornadoes. Basically, it was May 3rd all over again.
But we're going to say it right now. This is May 3rd, all over again.
The 2013 tornado tore a similar path through the southern suburb of Oklahoma City, demolishing every single building, leaving a visible scar in its wake. After the tornado, the National Weather Service produced one of the most detailed tornado surveys ever, and at 3 different spots, they found EF5 level damage. These 3 homes were fully swept off of their foundations. A leading theory as to why this damage is so much worse is because the tornado had looped here. I also want to point out this damage here near the Orr family farm, where multiple buildings were fully swept, with ground scouring nearby. 2 weeks later, the Oklahoma City area was hit by another massive, violent tornado, the 2013 El Reno tornado. The El Reno tornado followed an extremely erratic path, eventually swelling to over 2.6 miles wide, making it the widest tornado on record. It was also sampled by Doppler radar, which showed a wind speed of 313 miles per hour. This wind speed measurement pushed the National Weather Service to rate the tornado EF5. However, the damage found at the ground really wasn't that extreme, so the EF5 rating was taken away. If we're going to compare the strength of infamous Oklahoma tornadoes, it's clear to me that the 1999 Bridge Creek, 2011 El Reno Piedmont, and 2013 Moore tornadoes were the strongest to strike the Oklahoma City area. And between these 3, 1999...
I'm not going to lie. If I could go back and do my top 10, the El Reno and Piedmont tornado would be a lot higher. It would be a lot higher. Maybe one day later down the road we'll do that again.
Bridge Creek and 2011 El Reno Piedmont seem to be a tier above the 2013 Moore EF5. I feel like I've only focused on modern tornadoes, but there is one tornado that is historically known for its extreme strength. The 1896 Sherman, Texas F5. The most notable evidence of its strength was the way it twisted and mangled an iron bridge, supposedly leaving it into unusable scrap metal, an impressive feat for a tornado. Unfortunately, there aren't any high-quality photos from this event, making it difficult to fully analyze these claims. Other tornadoes have thrown bridges, like the Woodward F5 and Tuscaloosa tornado. However, these tornadoes never turned the bridges into useless scrap metal, so maybe the Sherman tornado really was exceptionally strong. On March 18, 1925, a tornado formed in southeast Missouri, tracked all the way across Illinois into Indiana. This tornado was on the ground for over 200 miles and was moving at over 70 miles per hour. The tornado leveled entire towns, peaking at around 1 mile wide. There's some debate as to whether this was a single tornado or a series of tornadoes from a tornado family, but I won't speculate. What's certain is that this tornado directly impacted several towns and tragically claimed 695 lives. There are many photographs documenting its devastation, and it's clear this tornado harbored immense
The
power and
tri-state
deserves to be
tornado.
in the conversation as one of the strongest tornadoes in history. About 100 years later, an eerily similar tornado would form. On the night of December 10th, 2021, a supercell put down a tornado in Arkansas. After tracking over 80 miles, the tornado lifted. The storm quickly put down another tornado that would track for over 160 miles, making it one of the longest track tornadoes in history. The Mayfield tornado produced some of the worst tornado damage in recent times, especially near the town of Bremen, where it wiped multiple homes off their foundations and scoured the ground. I consider the Mayfield tornado the strongest tornado since the 2013 Moore EF5. However, if there's one other stronger tornado since Moore, it's the Bologna EF4. At multiple points along this tornado's path, it not only destroyed, but completely shattered and wiped homes off of their foundations. I don't want to get into the strange comments made by the
Both the Mayfield and the Bologna tornado are insane. Super strong tornadoes, dude. Scary.
NWS about why this tornado didn't get the EF5 rating, like how homes shouldn't rate tornadoes and single points of failure above. The point is, this tornado was immensely strong and produced some of the worst tornado damage ever documented. Another tornado worth mentioning is the tornado that tracked through Greenfield, Iowa. Tornado my buddy and I were actually chasing. While the tornado...
Wait, I remember this. Was it High Risk Chris when he was chasing that he barely got by it before it went directly behind him? Him and his buddy, they couldn't call each other, and his buddy couldn't let him know that the Greenfield tornado was like making a direct beeline for him, and they were going to cross paths. Luckily enough, he didn't have to slow down or stop for anything, because had he done that,
tornado went through town. Mobile Doppler radar was scanning the tornado, and they found the tornado had up to 318 mile-per-hour winds, putting the Greenfield tornado in the conversation as one of the strongest tornadoes in history. To really understand this measurement, you have to compare it to other wind speed measurements. At an average speed of 314 miles per hour, the Greenfield measurement surpasses even the 1999 Bridge Creek tornado's record. While this is an amazing feat, the damage that occurred in Greenfield at the time of the measurement is nowhere near as bad as some of the other tornadoes I've mentioned in this video, which leads me to believe that some of the tornadoes that were never measured by Doppler radar, like those from the 2011 Super Outbreak, were probably much stronger than Greenfield and Bridge Creek.
Holy shit.
On May 25th, 2008, an extremely powerful
Parkersburg.
EF5 tornado decimated the south side of Parkersburg, Iowa, wiping clean every single building it came into contact with. The most impressive feat of damage was when this tornado cracked concrete foundations, which is only seen in the absolute highest caliber tornadoes. So far, I've mentioned every EF5 except for one. Do you know which one it is? On May 4th, 2007, a monster wedge tornado went through the town of Greensburg, Kansas.
poor Greensburg, man. It almost got hit again this year, right? It almost took the exact same path to run directly over top of poor old Greensburg. We got lucky it dodged it that time. Or the tornado dodged Greensburg. A poor small town, man. Already been ravaged, lost like a high percentage of its population. I'm glad it didn't get hit again. But the tornado that went over top of this poor town was bigger than the town. That's insane, man. Just a small town in the middle of Kansas. And you get that unlucky that a massive tornado just rolls right over top of you.
The wide, powerful tornado destroyed almost every single building in town, and while the damage in Greensburg is extremely impressive, the tornado actually appeared to peak in strength just south of town, where it left deep scours in the earth. On June 8, 1995, a violent tornado impacted the town of Pampa, Texas. This type of tornado is commonly called a drill bit tornado because of its tight core and violent winds. Tornado historian Thomas Grzulius said in his book, if there was ever a video of an F6 tornado, it was the Pampa, Texas tornado of 1995. Thomas's opinion holds a lot of weight because there really isn't anyone more knowledgeable on tornado history than him. But the craziest thing is, Pampa might not have even been the strongest tornado on this day. To the southeast, 2 other violent tornadoes formed, and these tornadoes visually looked much more impressive. Also, the Kellerville tornado peeled asphalt off of a road, which is something only the highest end tornadoes are capable of doing. This tornado was likely much stronger, it just never directly impacted any towns. Now we're going way back for this next one. On June 12, 1899, a large and violent tornado tore into the southwest corner of New Richmond, Wisconsin. Several of the town's residents recalled hearing a faint rumble in the distance, which many mistook for the sound of a passing train. The tornado turned the business district into a pile of rubble. Multi-story brick buildings were ground down to the surface. Trees were completely debarked. Nothing was left standing. The tornado also tore an iron frame bridge from its supports. In total, 117 people were killed by this beast, making it the 3rd deadliest tornado at the time, and is currently the 9th deadliest tornado in American history. A large number of tornadoes happen in open fields and don't hit any structures, but even when
That's the way we like them. Middle of an open field, not bothering anybody. That's what they all need to do.
tornadoes don't hit any structures, they still leave evidence of their immense power. One of the best examples of this is the 1990 Bakersfield Valley tornado. It shifted 3 massive oil tanks more than a mile, each weighing 180,000 pounds. Incredibly, one of these tanks rolled 600 meters up a steep incline. That same year, an extremely photogenic supercell and tornado formed in western Nebraska. This tornado only came into contact with a few buildings, but when it did, they were completely eviscerated. A home was turned into a pile of twigs, and the ground was deeply scoured, and vehicles were shredded into tiny pieces.
Oh my God. Wow. That's insane.
This is genuinely some of the worst vehicle damage ever documented. Another example of impressive damage occurred with the Harper, Kansas F4. Even though this tornado was on the ground for less than half a mile, it left extreme damage, scouring the earth and crumpling vehicles. That same year, the Marion, North Dakota F4 left the 2nd widest swath of ground scouring ever documented, right behind the Jarrell, Texas tornado. This tornado scar could also be seen in satellite imagery. While there are countless more tornadoes I could cover in this video, I went over the tornadoes that stand out in terms of raw strength. But I still haven't answered the question, what is the strongest tornado in history? To answer this nearly impossible question, what I did was lined up all the tornadoes from this video and took note of any extreme feats of damage. I then made a chart to tick off what each tornado had done, and in general, the stronger tornadoes had done more impressive feats of damage. This is the chart, and I am so sorry that your eyes have to look at this. This is way too much information to put in one frame on a YouTube video. All you tornado nerds, if you really want to take a screenshot, do it right now. And then I tallied up the different points to see which tornadoes had the most impressive feats of damage, which in theory would correlate with whichever tornado is the strongest. But these results are not the end-all be-all. There's definitely
Look, I know the 2000 El Reno's low on points here. It spent most of its life in open field. I'm going to say it again just like I did in my top 10 video. We got extremely lucky that thing didn't go through a big town. We got very, very lucky that day. Rainsville, Greensburg. Oh, all right. Let's get up here to the
bias, since more modern tornadoes have better documentation. So I took that into account.
So Hackleburg at 14. I could see Hackleburg was stout, man. 2011 El Reno Piedmont. Like I said, if I could go back and change anything about my top 10, the 2011 El Reno Piedmont tornado would be much higher on the list. Smithville, the 1925 Tri-State tornado, Greenfield, Mayfield, hey, the home state, baby. That's not a good thing. Mayfield was stout. I'm surprised that Jarrell isn't higher up that list. I feel like Jarrell gets some hate because it moves slow, which allowed it more time to do damage. And that's one of the most dangerous things about that tornado. That's what made it part of its strength, is it was a strong tornado and it was slow moving. And I feel like people are putting points against it because it was slow moving. Like, I get it, yeah, it had more time to sweep things clean. That's just how that tornado was. All right, I ain't going to rant on it again. I'm sorry. Rainsville? What do you guys think? What is your all's... What do you think the strongest tornado in history was? I want to hear it. Put it in the comments.
And I made my top 10 strongest tornadoes list. At number 10 is the 1977 Birmingham F5. This tornado was given a preliminary rating of F6, so I think Ted Fujita would agree with me. Also, this tornado swept multiple homes in an extremely violent fashion. At number 9 is the 2013 Moore EF5. Even though the EF5 damage from this tornado was relatively confined, that has more to do with modern tornado surveys. This tornado was absolutely one of the strongest EF5 tornadoes. At number 8 is the 1896 Sherman F5. This tornado famously tossed a steel...
See, I didn't have the older tornado knowledge. You know, I'm starting to get to some of those, but most of my list was earlier tornadoes that I'd already covered and knew something about. 1896, I have no idea.
bridge and shredded it to pieces, while also killing over 70 people. This tornado was definitely violent. Number 7 is the 1974 Guin F5. This tornado was, in my opinion, the strongest tornado during the 1974 Super Outbreak. It cracked concrete foundations, and it left an extremely visible tornado scar. At number 6 is the 1997 Jarrell F5. While many consider this the strongest tornado ever, I have issues with that because it moved so slowly. However, it still contained extremely...
I hate that. See what I mean, though, by people take points away from it because it moved slowly? It happened. That was part of the tornado. That's what made it... That was part of its strength. We can't be deducting points because it moved slow. It was a strong tornado that moved slow. That is a nightmare. Especially when it's over top of your town. Right? I mean, if it's like 20 miles away from you coming your way, it's good news, right? You have time to get the heck out of there or get underground. But if it's already over top of your town, RIP. But I hate when people deduct points from it because of that.
Violent winds, because it peeled asphalt and scraped the top layer of soil. At number 5 is the 1999 Bridge Creek F5. While this tornado had measured winds of 321 miles per hour, radar measurements aren't everything. However, the damage left by this tornado was impressive enough to put it in the top 5. At number 4 is the 1925 Tri-State Tornado. This tornado holds many records. It's the deadliest tornado in American history, as well as the longest track. And while it was on the ground, it left extreme damage. However, these next tornadoes left even more extreme damage. At number 3 is the 2011 Phil Campbell EF5. This tornado was the longest track and arguably most dominant tornado during the 2011 Super Outbreak. It also checked off almost every single box of damage, peeling asphalt off the ground, damaging concrete foundations, while also lifting the roof of an underground storm shelter.
Strong, dude.
Number 2 is the 2011 El Reno EF5. This tornado is unquestionably one of the most violent tornadoes in history. It lifted a 2 million pound oil rig, flattened every home it came into contact with, and shredded all vegetation at the ground. Also, the scar left by this tornado was extremely visible.
I'll support that.
What I consider to be the strongest tornado in history, containing the fastest winds on Earth, is the 2011 Smithville EF5. This tornado dug trenches in the ground, and as it went through the town of Smithville, It left such severe damage, it almost looked like a giant dagger was cutting through town, and it was doing all of this while moving at over 60 miles per hour. It also threw a vehicle so violently it dented the town's water tower, which has never happened as far as I'm aware. This tornado was also probably in the most extreme tornado environment ever documented. The storm's photograph is literally off the charts. It's kind of hard to explain, but trust me, this is insane. And I know I'm gonna get some backlash for calling Smithville the strongest tornado ever, especially from all you Oklahoma people. But this tornado has by far the most evidence to support its claim as the strongest tornado in history. I think it's kind of eerie that the fastest winds on Earth happen in random places like Mississippi, Alabama, or Oklahoma.
Okay, what do you guys think? Is this a valid list? I don't know anything about like these old tornadoes, so I can't comment on them, right? I'm going to say that I think Jarrell's higher. I could definitely see Smithville, the El Reno Piedmont tornado, Hackleburg, Phil Campbell. Once again, we're lucky the 2013 El Reno tornado didn't go through a town. We're lucky. I still think that's easily one of the strongest tornadoes of all time. Fortunately, it didn't go through a town. I'll die on that hill. The Piedmont tornado, that's one I wish I could have moved higher. Smithville's obviously insane. Hackleburg, Bridge Creek. Once again, I just hate that people take points away from Jarrell because of what it moves slow. To me, that's one of its strengths. If it got over top of a town like it did, that's what it's going to do. All right. Anyways, in the comments below, let me know what you think is the strongest tornado of all time. Keep it inside of the United States for me. Makes it a little bit easier for me to research, and maybe I already know a little bit about it. I don't care how far back you go back, because I'm going to start doing that myself, learning about some of the older tornadoes. But yeah, let me know what you think the strongest tornado of all time was inside the U.S. All right, guys, I am Cheap. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and all that good jazz. And also, don't forget to check out High Risk Chris. Description below, you'll be able to find all this stuff. We'll catch you in the next one.